Some things, some objects, are best left unopened, untouched by the light of the present day. Some secrets, woven into the fabric of old houses and forgotten lives, should remain buried deep within the earth, or deeper still, within the silent archives of time. I learned that lesson, the hard way, a truth etched into my mind with chilling clarity. It was just an old diary, you see, found tucked away in the shadowed, dusty confines of an attic, in a house I'd just inherited, a house that already felt burdened by the weight of unseen years. Leather-bound, its cover warped and stained by age, clasped shut by a tarnished piece of brass. It looked innocuous enough, a forgotten relic, a curiosity. But the words inside, they weren't just words inked on brittle paper. They were seeds. Seeds of unease, of dread, of something else entirely. And they started to grow, to take root in my world, and more terrifyingly in my mind. I wished to whatever God might listen that I'd never found the diary of E. Finch. Now, I'm not sure whose life I'm living anymore, or if the thoughts in my head are even my own. My great-aunt Eleanor, a woman I barely knew, passed away a few months ago, leaving me, to my considerable surprise, her small, somewhat dilapidated Victorian house nestled deep in rural New England. She had always been a recluse, a shadowy figure from my childhood, someone I'd only met a handful of times during brief, awkward family gatherings. Her house, when I finally made the trip to inspect my inheritance, was exactly as you'd imagine such a place to be. Layers of dust lay thick as velvet on every surface, the air was heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten things, and it was filled with imposing, antique furniture draped in ghostly white sheets. It possessed a profound, echoing silence that seemed to swallow sound, a silence that felt ancient and watchful. I'm a freelance writer, always on the lookout for a quiet place to work, a sanctuary from the distractions of modern life, so inheriting the house, despite its evident state of disrepair and the unsettling atmosphere, felt like a small, unexpected blessing. My name is Thomas, by the way. Or at least, it was. The first few weeks were spent in a whirlwind of practicalities. Cleaning, airing the place out, trying to chase away the lingering scent of must and old secrets, getting a feel for its peculiar creaks and groans, the language of an old house settling into its bones. It was during one of these marathon cleaning sprees, while tackling the musty, cobweb-filled attic, a space that felt like a tomb for forgotten dreams, that I found it. Tucked into a dark, dusty corner, beneath a pile of moth-eaten linens that crumbled at my touch and several forgotten, dented hat boxes, was a small, unassuming, leather-bound book. It was clearly very old, the leather cracked and faded to a dull, indeterminate brown, the pages yellowed and brittle at the edges. A simple brass clasp, green with the verdigris of age, held it shut as if guarding its contents. There was no name on the cover, no title, no indication of its owner or its purpose. Intrigued by its air of quiet mystery, I brought it downstairs, away from the oppressive gloom of the attic. Later that evening, with a much-needed fire crackling merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the parlor walls, and a fierce autumn storm raging outside, its wind howling like a banshee, I finally managed to pry the stubborn clasp open with a dull click. The first page, written in an elegant, yet spidery and slightly unsettling script, the ink faded but still legible, read, "The Private Musings and Observations of E. Finch. Commenced this day, October the 17th, in the year of our Lord, 1888. E. Finch." I didn't recognize the name from any family stories my mother had told, no mention of such an ancestor. The diary, as I began to read, detailed the daily life of someone, presumably E. Finch, living in this very house, over a century ago. The initial entries were quite mundane, almost disappointingly so. Brief notes about the weather, the challenges of a leaky roof, a formal visit from the local parson, the fluctuating price of eggs at the market, the health of a neighbor's cow. It was quaint, almost boring, a dry recitation of a life long past. I found myself reading a few pages each night, more out of a sense of historical curiosity than any real engagement, a window into a forgotten time. Then, about a week into my nightly readings, the tone and content of the entries started to subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, change. They grew stranger, more introspective, tinged with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite name. October the 29th. The wind, it whispers such peculiar things through the eaves of this old house tonight. Not words, precisely, not in any language I comprehend. More like suggestions, feelings, impressions pressed into the mind. It speaks often of the old well in the back garden, the one covered with heavy, moss-slicked stones. I knew that well. It was still there, a moss-covered circle of fieldstones half hidden by a tangle of overgrown bushes at the far end of the neglected garden. I'd always assumed it was long dry, a forgotten relic. The thought of it now sent an odd, unwelcome shiver down my spine. Another entry, a few days later, November the 5th. I find myself drawing the same peculiar pattern, over and over, in the margins of my ledgers, on scraps of paper, even in the condensation on the window panes. A spiral, coiling inwards, with a single, watchful eye at its very center. It appeared to me in a dream, vivid and commanding, and now my hand will not rest until it is rendered on paper. It feels important, significant, as if it's a key to something I do not yet understand, or perhaps, a lock. A cold shiver traced its way down my spine, prickling my skin. I'd seen that spiral. While cleaning the suffocating confines of the attic, I'd found a loose floorboard near the eaves, and underneath, crudely but deeply carved into the dark, aged wood, was that exact symbol. A coiling spiral with a roughly etched eye at its heart, staring blindly up into the darkness. Coincidence, I told myself, my voice a little too loud in the silent room. Just a common motif, an old design. But the explanation felt thin, unconvincing, even to me. The diary entries, however, became increasingly focused on unseen things, on unexplained whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house, on shadows that danced in the periphery of vision, and on a growing, palpable sense of unease that Finch experienced within the house's oppressive embrace. November the 12th. The reflections in the window panes are not always my own. Sometimes, for just a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, another face looks back at me from the glass. Pale, gaunt, and always watching. November the 19th. I hear footsteps in the upstairs hallway when no one is home, when I am quite alone in this creaking shell. Soft, hesitant, almost furtive, as if the walker is unsure of its welcome, or perhaps it is simply learning the layout of the house, familiarizing itself with its new domain. Finch's elegant script grew more erratic as the days passed, the ink sometimes smudged as if by a trembling hand, the entries shorter, more frantic, more desperate. There were increasingly frequent mentions of strange, vivid dreams, of a constant, oppressive presence in the house that felt cold and ancient and utterly alien. The suggestions from the wind, once subtle, became more insistent, more demanding, urging Finch to perform certain actions, to go to certain places on the property at specific, ungodly times of the night. The diary didn't specify what these actions were, only that Finch felt an overwhelming, irresistible compulsion to obey, a terrifying loss of personal agency. I should have stopped reading then. I know that now, with the clarity of hindsight that offers no comfort. I should have closed the ancient book, locked it away in the darkest corner of the attic, perhaps even yielded to the primal urge to burn it, to reduce its secrets to ash and smoke. But I was hooked and snared. The mystery of Finch, this forgotten life so intimately intertwined with a creeping, unseen, psychological horror, was too compelling, too seductive. It was like reading a private, real-life ghost story, unfolding in the very house where I now slept, and I felt an unhealthy compulsion to see it through to its inevitable, dreadful end. The first time something from the diary bled unmistakably into my own reality was subtle, almost dismissible. One evening, I was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, the house quiet around me save for the sighing of the wind outside. The diary lay open on the kitchen table, the last entry I'd read describing a persistent, faint, cloyingly sweetish odor, like overripe fruit mixed with the cloying scent of damp earth, that Finch couldn't locate, a smell that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. As I poured the hot water into my mug, I smelled it. Exactly as described. Faint, yes, but undeniably there. Sweet, yet somehow rotten, earthy, and deeply, profoundly unsettling. I searched the kitchen, the pantry, even the damp, cobweb-filled cellar. Nothing. The smell faded after an hour or so, as suddenly and inexplicably as it had appeared, leaving me questioning my own senses. Power of suggestion, I told myself forcefully. My mind, overly influenced by the diary's vivid descriptions, was creating the scent, a psychosomatic manifestation of my growing unease. It was a comforting lie for a time. Then, I started noticing other patterns, other echoes from Finch's time. Finch wrote of a particular floorboard in the parlor that always creaked, no matter how carefully one trod upon it, a mournful sigh from the old wood. I found the board. It creaked, a long, low groan that seemed to complain at my weight. Finch described a patch of unnerving coldness in the upstairs hallway, near the attic door, a spot that never seemed to warm, even on the sunniest of days. I felt it too, a distinct, unnatural chill in that exact location, a pocket of icy air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was as if the diary wasn't just a record of the past, but a map, a guide to the house's lingering peculiarities, its subtle, ingrained hauntings. The entries in the diary grew darker, more desperate. Finch wrote of sleepless nights filled with terror, of a growing fear of the mirrors in the house, which sometimes showed not Finch's reflection, but that of a pale, watching other. Finch wrote of a voice that had started to whisper directly, no longer just through the wind, but from the deepest shadows in the corners of rooms, a voice that promised terrible, beautiful things. December the 3rd. It wants something from me. It has shown me glimpses in my dreams. Visions not of this world, beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. I dare not write what it asks of me. The price is too high. I started having trouble sleeping myself. The silence of the old house, once a comfort, a writer's boon, now felt oppressive, pregnant, filled with unspoken possibilities and unseen watchers. I'd lie awake for hours, muscles tense, ears straining for footsteps in the empty hallways, for those sibilant whispers Finch described. Sometimes I thought I heard them, faint and indistinct, just at the edge of my perception. Sometimes I was sure I was just imagining it, my mind succumbing to the atmosphere of the house and the diary's grim narrative. The line between reality and suggestion was blurring, becoming dangerously thin. One night, I woke suddenly, a scream caught in my throat, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. In the dim, watery moonlight filtering through my bedroom window, I saw a figure standing in the far corner of my room. Tall, impossibly thin, shrouded in shadow, its proportions subtly wrong, inhuman. I blinked, my eyes stinging, and it was gone. A dream, I told myself, a vivid, terrifying nightmare brought on by reading the diary too late into the night. But the terror felt chillingly real, its icy grip lingering long after the figure had vanished. The next morning, my hands shaking, I found a small, unfamiliar smudge of what looked like damp, dark earth on the floorboards where the figure had stood, a physical residue of my nocturnal horror. I became obsessed with finishing the diary, possessed by a desperate need to find some explanation, some resolution to Finch's torment, and by extension, my own growing, consuming unease. The final entries were written in a shaky, almost illegible hand, the ink splattered and hurried, as if Finch was racing against time, or against something far worse. December the 15th. The spiral. It is the key. It has always been the key. It demands the offering at the well. Tonight. I am so afraid. So very afraid. But it promises. Release. An end to the whispers. December the 16th. I cannot resist any longer. The whispers are too strong now, inside my head, a constant chorus. The house. It breathes with a terrible anticipation. It waits. The last entry was dated December 17, 1888, exactly 2 months after the diary began. It consisted of a single, spidery, triumphant yet despairing sentence. The offering is made. The connection is complete. I am Finch no more. And below it, not written but carved deeply into the brittle page with something sharp, something desperate, was the spiral symbol, the eye at its center seeming to stare up at me with a malevolent, ancient intelligence. That was it. The diary ended. No explanation. No further entries. Just that chilling, final, ambiguous statement. A cold, profound dread settled over me, heavier than any physical weight. What offering? What connection? What in God's name had happened to E. Finch? I found myself drawn, as if by an unseen cord, to the back garden, to the old, forgotten well. It was covered with heavy flagstones, sealed with what looked like ancient, crumbling mortar, a tomb for forgotten secrets. It would take serious effort, perhaps tools I didn't possess, to open it. Was that where Finch had made the final, terrible offering? What had been offered? And to what? That night the house felt different. Charged. Alive. The whispers were no longer just at the edge of my hearing, no longer deniable. They were clear, distinct, slithering through the rooms like invisible serpents. They weren't in English, but in that strange, sibilant, clicking language hinted at in the diary's early entries about the wind. And they seemed to be calling my name. Or rather, not my name. Finch's name. Elias, they seemed to hiss, the sound seeming to coalesce from the very shadows. Elias, the time is near, the cycle continues, the offering awaits. Elias? Was that E. Finch's first name? The diary had only ever used the initial. I locked myself in my bedroom, barricading the door with a heavy dresser, a futile gesture against something that seeped through walls. But the whispers followed, seeping through the door, through the ancient plaster walls, through the very floorboard. I saw shadows move in my peripheral vision, fleeting glimpses of that tall, impossibly thin figure I'd seen in my nightmare, always just out of focus, always vanishing when I tried to look directly. The house groaned and settled around me, not with the comfortable, familiar sounds of an old structure, but with something that felt like a hungry anticipation, the same terrible anticipation E. Finch had written about in those final, desperate days. I spent a sleepless, tormented night, huddled under the covers like a child, jumping at every creak, every sigh of the wind, every imagined sound. Just before dawn, as a pale, sickly, gray light began to filter through the grimy curtains, I heard a distinct, deliberate tapping at my bedroom door. Tap, 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 tap. It was the same rhythmic pattern E. Finch had described hearing from the walls, a pattern that now felt like a summons. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling so violently I could barely form the words. The only reply was a soft, sibilant, chilling whisper from the other side of the door, a voice that sounded impossibly old, impossibly dry. "The offering, Elias. It is time. The connection must be renewed. Elias. Not Thomas. Elias." I didn't open the door. I waited, frozen in terror, until full, blessed daylight streamed into the room, chasing away some of the deepest shadows. Then, I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and I fled that house. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I drove until the gas tank was almost empty, putting as much distance as humanly possible between myself and that place of encroaching madness. I sold the house through a lawyer, as is, sight unseen by the new owners, taking a significant financial loss. I didn't care. No amount of money was worth another night under that roof. It's been almost a year now. I live in a modern, characterless, anonymous apartment in the city, surrounded by the constant, reassuring noise of traffic and neighbors. Lots of neighbors. Lots of noise. I threw the diary away, or at least, I tried to. I sealed it in a box, weighted it with stones, and dropped it into a deep, fast-flowing river miles from my new place. A week later, it was back on my doorstep, dry and intact, no note, no explanation. Just the old leather-bound book, its brass clasp gleaming faintly in the hallway light, as if waiting. It's on my desk now as I write this, its presence a cold weight in the room. I haven't opened it again. I'm too afraid of what I might find, or what might find me through its pages. Sometimes, late at night, when the city finally quiets down to a dull roar, I hear it, a faint, sibilant whisper, seeming to come from the diary itself, from across the room. Elias, the connection, waits, the offering. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection unexpectedly in a dark window, or a polished surface, just for a fleeting, heart-stopping second, the face looking back isn't quite mine. It's paler, thinner. And its eyes are lost in shadow, deep and ancient and knowing. I don't know what happened to E. Finch, what terrible offering was made at that old well so many years ago. But I think the diary is more than just a record of a descent into madness. I think it's a conduit, a bridge, a key, as Finch himself suspected. And whatever Finch connected with, it's still out there, and it thinks I'm Elias. Or maybe, more terrifyingly, slowly, inexorably, I'm becoming him. The cycle continues, just as the whispers promised all those months ago. And I fear my own final entry, in a diary I dare not open, is yet to be written.